You may be seated, church. Well, we've been talking about blessings for about the last month. You may remember we talked first about the blessing of words and the power that words have to bless other people. We talked about the blessing of money, how good God has been to us and provide to us financially, and how he allows us, therefore, to be a channel of that blessing as we share what we have with the church and with others. Last week, I shared with you a sermon about the blessing of presence, how important it is just to be there in the lives of people. I have to tell you the truth, when I wrote this series, I asked myself, would that sermon connect? And so many of you this week have said to me, we were just reminded of something so important last week, Pastor Todd, that sometimes when it feels like we don't have the right words to say or we don't have anything that we can give that'll actually change a situation, we are just there in someone's life and it makes a difference. And so thank you for living that sermon out this week. This morning, I want to talk about one final blessing, a precious blessing that maybe sometimes we don't think about as much as we ought. I want to talk to you about the blessing of new beginnings. I want you to know that our God is not the God of status quo. If you ever think life has just stood still, wait a moment. You'll see that's just not the way life works. We live in a world that's constantly changing. The very nature of creation itself is constantly reordering. In fact, think about it from the perspective of our own bodies. From the cradle to the grave, nothing about your body stays the same, does it? Aren't I right? You think about it in life. You start little and you increase and you get taller and taller and taller, and then eventually you start to actually get shorter, don't you? Our strength and agility, it increases and then it decreases. Our hair, it increases and then it decreases. For some of us, it just descends, I think, or something like that. How about our waistline? It increases. All right, never mind. That one doesn't always work out. But we are always changing. Our world is always changing. Things are constantly changing. And God's marker of change in our world are seasons. That's how God reminds us and demonstrates to us that life is not status quo, but that it is always changing. In fact, God himself has mandated that life has seasons. In a famous passage from the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon says this, there is a time for everything and a what? A what? A season for every activity under heaven. Sometimes we like the fact that life has seasons. Sometimes we don't like that very much. Some of us look at the year and we love a season we're in and we see the season that's coming next and we don't like it very much. But you know what? Pretending that difficult seasons aren't there won't change that reality, will it? In fact, here's the truth. We like bright seasons. We like good seasons in our life. We love healthy seasons in our life. We love wealthy seasons in our life. But we don't like the thought of difficult seasons coming at us. But they exist. In fact, some of you are in one right now. Some of you are saying, thank God I just came out of one. Some of you are sensing maybe there's one right in front of you. But every person in this room knows this. Life has its dark seasons. Come on, turn to the person next to you and say, you know that's right. Come on, tell someone right now, you know that's right. Life has its dark seasons. Some of us don't even like to think about a sermon like this, where the pastor's going to actually call us to remember that it's true, because some of us don't even like to remember that time when we were that ill or our emotions were that troubled. We don't like to remember the time when our bodies felt like that, when our world crashed into 1,000 pieces. We don't want to remember the season when we lost our job and feared that we would lose our house, or that friendship kind of dissolved, or that person did to us what we did and we walked through that terrible season, and we don't even want to think about those things. But for those of you that are in the dark season, it doesn't help us to pretend they're not there. So let me take a couple minutes this morning to at least talk to you about being in the dark seasons. 2 ideas to help you when you're in the dark season. The first is this: when you're in the dark season, do more than sit and stew. When you're in the dark season, seek God. There's something to be learned in it. God has allowed it. It cannot be avoided. You need to understand that there are things that God can do. There are things, if you let him, that God will do in the dark seasons of your life that he cannot do in you at any other time. There are things that we learn about God and that we learn about ourselves during dark seasons that we could not learn in the good season. There are things that have to formulate in our lives and in our hearts during the difficult times. Sometimes we might refer to those seasons as the pruning season, a time when it feels like things are being trimmed back, they're not flowering. Jesus addresses this in John 15. Look what he says. I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, so that it'll be even more fruitful. This I know about a good gardener. They love their gardens, don't they? I mean, there's a difference between a gardener and the guy who's out here clearing off the earth. Gardeners love their gardens. And so when a gardener goes in and says it's time to do some pruning, he or she is going to prune, maybe even drastically, but for what is best for the branches and for the bush. When God prunes in your life, he doesn't do it to destroy you. He prunes back in your life because he loves you, because he actually has your best interests at heart. And so believe that God is at work in the dark season. There are some things that he is trying to accomplish, and he has a future purpose for the things that he is doing. Before I became a full-time pastor, I traveled for 5 years with my wife and her brother and his wife, 4 of us, in evangelism ministries. And what that meant, for those of you who haven't been around in church long enough, some of you are going to remember these days, they used to do these things called revival services. And you come, some of you are nodding your head, you remember the good old days of revival, you know? And so you'd start on a Sunday morning, and you'd have Sunday morning and Sunday night, and then it wouldn't be, nope, that's enough church that we could come back Monday night and Tuesday and Wednesday. If the Lord was moving, we'll tack Thursday on. And you just come in, you do church night after night after night. And the purpose of a revival was to do exactly what it sounds like. You brought someone to give a new voice, to bring the word of God in such a way that would renew and would restore and would challenge. We used to say in our ministry that we went in for 5 days and it was kind of like hit and run ministry. We came in and just kind of tell it like it is because you're given this wake-up call. And you know what? When you have a clock that needs to give you a wake-up, you're not looking for a clock that makes you feel good because that makes you stay in bed. You're looking for a clock that will sound an alarm. And this was the kind of ministry that we had that God had called us to. And it was valuable and it was important. And we would say some things that maybe the pastor felt uncomfortable being able to say when he had to stand and look at his people week in and week out and week in. And so we would do hit and run ministry and then we'd leave and let the pastor pick up the pieces. And then I became a pastor. And in order to shepherd a people, it requires a certain level of empathy and compassion and understanding. And there were things that God needed to work and develop in me that were very different from the personality of an evangelist, which is my most natural personality. And in order to formulate that in my life 15 years ago, I became very sick. And during that time, I went through tremendous physical difficulty and tremendous emotional and mental difficulty. And God didn't knock me down a few pegs. He buried me under the pegboard. And during that time, he developed inside of me a compassion and an understanding for those who go through all kinds of difficulties in this life. He gave me the capacity to become a shepherd, not just an evangelist. And that was not a season that I enjoyed in my life. It's not a season that I would ever look forward to going back to. but it was an important season in my life. And you see, I didn't just sit and stew during that time. I began to pursue God's heart during that time and say, okay, God, what is it that you have purposed for me even during this dark season in my life? And if you're going through a hard time right now, don't just sit and stew and say, I'll just bite my lip until it's over. Begin to say, God, what are you formulating inside of me during this time? The second thing you need to know in the dark season is don't despair. Don't despair. We often think once we're in the dark season, it's never going to change. It's always going to be this way. I'm never coming out. But do you understand that once you get to feel that way, you've given up the very principle of seasons itself? The very idea that seasons themselves say, this too will pass. Things will change. So you need to stop saying to yourself, I'm consigned to this forever. When we're in dark seasons, we want the autonomy to say, okay, God, that's enough. We're done. I can't handle anymore. It's time to go on to the next thing. But that's like the plant trying to tell the gardener what he needs to do. It's the gardener who has the wisdom. It's the gardener who loves the plant. And so as we are in the dark seasons, we say, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but this I know, God is going to bring me out. God is going to take me through. There's going to be a new day beyond the season that I am in. Because here's what I've discovered. Some people, when they get into the difficult seasons of their life, begin to come to the place where they are so determined that things are never going to change, that they actually come to a place where they'll almost stir things up to keep them going. It's almost as if they refuse to walk out of that season even when God drops the lifeline. Even when God brings the person who can help them go to where they get to next, they begin to say, no, not me. They develop a martyr complex. This always happens to me. I have it worse than everybody else. There's no one on the planet who can understand what I'm going through except maybe Job, and he's already dead. See that how that works? And God wants to take them out of that season, but they have so despaired, they have so made this the new normal, that they almost want to just embrace it and wallow in it and never step out of it. Never come out of the darkness and into the light. Why? Because when you're in the darkness long enough, your eyes get adjusted to it. And suddenly they would rather tell everybody about how bad it is. They'd rather blame everybody else who's done them wrong and say, I guess I'm just stuck and I'll have to stay here forever. But you don't have to stay there forever. Because it is not God's plan when we're in difficult seasons for us to live in despair. You know, in the Bible, the prophet Samuel went through a season like this. You might remember the story that Samuel anointed the very first king of Israel. Oh, on that day, there was no one more popular in the land than Samuel was, because God led him to choose a man that was so obviously the choice. Saul was taller than everybody else. He was this big, strong, strapping guy. He was so impressive that people said, oh, it's obvious to us that you know what you're doing, Samuel. And you know, Saul's the king and Samuel's the great prophet who's made him so. And they are loving Samuel for it. What a feel-good day it was for Samuel and Saul. But you know, not too long after that, Saul began to chase other things and his heart was moving away from God. He wasn't serving God with everything in him. And then Saul began to very specifically and intentionally disobey God to the point to where God finally came to Samuel and said, you know what, Samuel, Saul's not the guy anymore. I'm taking the kingdom away from him. I'm tearing it out of his hands. And after Samuel went and made that declaration to King Saul, Saul goes spinning off into just craziness. Samuel goes spinning off too, into darkness and depression. He just disappears off the scene. And we understand based on what God says to Samuel, I'll read it to you in just a minute, that Samuel got caught in this vapor lock of regret and disappointment and discouragement and feeling like things had gone so wrong. He probably had thoughts like this: how did I mess up so bad? How did I get the wrong guy? God, do I even hear from you anymore, God? He probably had thoughts like this: what are other people going to think of me? I mean, how are they ever going to trust me to anoint the next king? I'm 0 for 1 in the batter's box at the moment. And I think that's a batting average of 0. He said, God, why did you make me go through all this? If I trust you, if I'm your prophet. Is this how you do your prophets? Let me crash and burn like this? So Samuel's just stuck in the dark season and despair. And look what God says to him. 1 Samuel 16, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul? Since I've rejected him as king over Israel. Look what he tells him to do. Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. God says, Samuel, you've mourned long enough. You've been in this dark room long enough. Here's what you got to do. You got to get up, fill that horn with oil, and I'm taking you to the next king. And God didn't tell Samuel this yet, but he's going to go anoint the one who's going to be the greatest king that Israel will ever have. That's what's around the corner. And while Samuel's sitting in the darkness lamenting, God's planning and moving forward. And he says, come on, Samuel, get on board with me because there's a new season ahead. All right, we've talked long enough about the dark season. Let me tell you about that new season. 2 things I want you to know about the new season that's coming in your life. Number 1, there's one coming whether you see it or not. Come on, someone say amen today. We're coming out of the dark part of the sermon. Get with me here. Come on, help me out a bit. It's windy out there, but it ain't windy in here, all right? There's a new one coming whether you see it or not. So often, we're like, I'll believe it when I see it, but isn't the very nature of faith to begin to trust God before we see things? Isn't that what faith itself is? Isaiah 43:19 says, I'm about to do something new. All right, he hasn't even done it yet. I'm about to do something new. Something new's coming. See, I've already begun. So he says, see? And then he says, wait, don't you see? Man, I'm already getting it started. Don't you see that I am at work? You see, some things can only be seen through eyes of faith. It's like when winter is coming to an end and we get March. I was born in the month of March. I think it's the worst month of the year. Because it's still windy and it's still cold and there's all this talk about spring coming, but you just don't really see it very often in March. But here's what's happening. Even though you can't feel it because it's still so windy and it feels so cold, the days are getting longer. And even when you don't feel it because of the wind, the sun is warming the earth. And even though nothing has blossomed in your garden yet, the seeds under the ground are starting to crack open. And those sprouts are starting to push up through the soil. And no, you can't see it. But you got to trust. There's another season coming. And I'm telling you, people of God, the season of life that you're in right now, this difficulty and this trial, God's going to bring you out. There's a new season coming, and you might not see it yet, but by eyes of faith, if you just begin to say, God, I can't see it yet, but I'm trusting you for it. And here's why you need to do it. Because so many of us can stop one step short of his miracle. Isn't that when the devil's going to fight the hardest? Look, the devil is not omniscient. He is not omniscient. He does not know everything you think. He does not know everything God is up to. He is none of those things. But he is extremely wily and intelligent and perceptive. And the devil can sense things. He knows God's tactics and his ways. And so he will try to discourage you at the last moment. Some of you are getting ready to throw in the towel, but you don't know the bell is about to ring and the last round is over and the fight's going to be called in your favor. Some of you want to jump off the bull, but if you'll stay on just a split second longer, the bell is going to ring and you win. Some of you want to quit, but if you'll hang on just a moment longer, you're about to win. And you see, you have to realize there's a new season coming, whether you see it or not. God finds a way to work for our good that we can never outguess. I think I've told you this before, but one of the oldest pastors that I ever worked with when we were on the road in evangelism sat down one night and said, Pastor Todd, he said, after all of the years of pastoring and all the things I've seen, he said, if I could write one book, he says, I think I would write the book called Our Whimsical God. Because he just does things the way he wants to do them, and he doesn't have to do them the way he did them last time. And God will do things that we can never guess. In fact, look what the scripture said today. I'll create rivers in the dry wasteland. Doesn't sound like the kind of place where you'd expect a river to suddenly flow, does it? How do you get a river in a dry wasteland? God, you might as well tell me you're going to make a highway out of flour, sugar, and water this Christmas, you know? We'll all sit down and eat it together. I mean, how can you do this stuff? But he's God, and he can do things. We have no idea how he can pull them off. And he's seeing something around the corner, and we can't even see that there's a corner because there's a new season ahead, and it's coming whether you see it or not. Finally, you need to know that it is time to embrace it. It's time to embrace it. It's time to do more than just sit there today and to say, all right, well, maybe there's a new season ahead, you know, la-di-da, whatever. No, we begin to say, okay, God, if I'm going to trust you that there's a new season ahead, then I'm going to begin to act like there is a new season ahead. It's time for me to let hope begin to arise inside of my heart. It's time for me to let some doubts go. It's time for me to believe again for the things that I'm not yet seeing, because that's faith. Let me show you one more time the expression we looked at earlier today. He said this, I'm about to do something new. See, I've already begun. Do you not? One more time. What's that word? See it. Now, the Hebrew word for see, right there in verse 19, the Hebrew word for see there is the word yada. All right, the Hebrew word for yada. We're just going to jump to a quick Hebrew lesson today. You're going to be glad that we got there, all right? The Hebrew word for see, I think it's the next screen, Dave, is the word yada, all right? And the word yada can be translated to see or to know. God is saying that I've got a new season. Don't you know? Don't you know that I've got this new season coming? Will you just grab onto this and understand it? This word know, this word yada in Hebrew is actually the term to know. You can trace it all the way back into the early chapters of Genesis. In fact, let me show you from Genesis 4:25. It says this, Adam lay with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, saying, God has granted me another child in place of Abel, since Cain killed him. And you're like, Pastor Todd, I do not see the word know, and I don't see the word see up there anywhere, all right? But I'm going to show you where it is. In fact, can I just tell you something? There is this knock on churches that like churches aren't really for men. But can I just talk to all the married men in the room today and say, you're going to leave today and say, you know what, Pastor Todd, you just helping us out. You're just giving us some valuable stuff in church. Here's what it is. The word know is in this verse. It's the second word in this sentence. Adam lay with his wife. It says Adam yada with his wife. In other words, Adam knew his wife. Are you ready for this, man? I'm going to give you the best pickup line for your wife tonight when you go home that you can ever have, all right? Just listen to me, man. Here's what it is. I just want you to go home today and say, you know what, honey? I just really want to know you. I just really want to know you, all right? Today at lunch, you say, honey, is there any chance there's any yada in our future tonight? I just want you to know that. I just want to know. Yeah, look, you know Pastor Todd's taking care of you. I'm giving you Hebrew pickup lines right now for your wife, all right? Email me tomorrow. Let me know how it went. I'll let you know how it goes for me, all right? So, you're like, all right, Pastor Todd, you're way out in the weeds, and all the men are like, I'm tracking with you, Pastor. We're good. Keep going. What in the world does it say through the sermon? In this passage, when it says that Adam knew his wife, this word yada, this comes right after the most horrific season that Adam and Eve had been through. Their one son had killed the other. Cain had killed Abel. How dark of a season would that be in your world? And coming out of that, God takes them into the next season by giving them another son. His name is Seth. And this is the one who will begin a righteous line of God-fearers. You see, God's going to take them into the next season. But watch, in order for it to happen, Adam and Eve have to yada. They have to know. They are going to participate. God's not going to immaculately conceive inside of Eve, Seth. He's going to pull off, our whimsical God will pull that off later, all right? No, Adam and Eve are going to participate in the very thing that's going to take them into the next season. Turn to someone and go, I get it now. I see where he's headed with all this. Adam and Eve are going to embrace. They're literally going to embrace each other. And they're going to embrace what is next. I assume this is something I need to deal with right now? Okay. Okay. There's a black cherry Silverado with firefighter tags. Chevy Silverado. Black cherry. Black cherry. That'd be a very specific one. If you have a black Chevy Silverado with firefighter tags. Okay. Yes. Back corner by the new building. If you have that one, move it before our building blows down on top of it. All right? So something like that. All right. There we go. Thank you. A blue Chevy Silverado. So that happens when you hire colorblind assistants. But don't you go out and tell her I said that. Now back to this really fun topic we were on. Now, to come into the next season, they had to embrace it. Well, literally, they're going to embrace each other, but they're embracing what is next. And I tell you this morning, some of you are like, man, I want to go on to the next season of my life. Then you've got to embrace it. You got to want to say, you know what, God, you work in seasons. And yeah, we've been in a dark, difficult time right now, but I am just believing you. I'm trusting you. I'm going to embrace it. I'm going to stop dwelling in the shadows. I'm going to grab a hold of my new tomorrow and say, you know what, at whatever level of responsibility I have to participate with God in my new tomorrow, I am willing to do it. God, I'm relying on you to do your part. Only you can make rivers in a wasteland. But God, what part is mine? Is it climbing out of bed and daring to proclaim, you know what, this is the day the Lord has made. I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. And I'll see that be a good day. Is it starting to speak less of your past and more of your future? Is it rediscovering some healthy and helpful things that once were a part of your life, but they've kind of gone away as you've gotten into the difficulty? Like, you know what, when I go back into doing some of these things, I know these are things that help me. They help where I put my mind. They help how my body feels. Is it reconnecting with someone? Is it forgiving someone? Is it maybe even forgiving yourself that is a part of the darkness that you have faced? Come on, folks, put on that makeup, wash those clothes, take that deeper breath, turn it to the Christian station, drive down the road, crank it up, and sing your heart out for the glory of God. Change that mindset. Turn your heart towards God. Set your eyes to a higher place and embrace the season that's coming. Prepare for that new season. There are all kinds of pastors out there. Many of them are really brave and bold enough to ask for things that other people wouldn't. One of them pastors in Central Ohio. Not very long ago, just a couple years ago, this pastor convinced one of his members, who was a heart surgeon, to allow him to actually come in and to observe the surgery. And so the surgeon amazingly allowed him to do it. And so the pastor came in, and he was there as others will come and observe, and he was just observing what was going on. As he eventually shared about that day, once he had all the proper permissions to do so, he talked about how he watched that doctor begin the process of that open heart surgery, opening up the chest cavity, exposing the heart, going through this entire intricate repair. And when he was done, he put the heart gingerly back into the chest cavity. And then the doctor began to massage the heart so that it would start to beat again. But on that day, it didn't. And so the doctor began to act in ways that were a little more extreme and got a little more aggressive, and they did everything that they knew how to do, but they could not get this patient's heart to start beating again. And so finally, this doctor did something so unorthodox, so not in any medical book anywhere, while the others were working to try to get her heart to start. He went over next to that patient, got up real close, leaned down near her ear, pulled his mask down and whispered into her ear, "Mrs. Johnson, this is your surgeon. The operation went perfectly. Your heart is completely repaired. But I need you to tell your heart to beat again. Within moments, her heart began to beat. You see, for some of us, God's done the work in this dark season. He's brought you through. He's ready to bring you out. He has repaired your heart. He has made the way in the desert. But now it's your move. Now it's your turn to embrace the blessings of new beginnings and tell your heart to beat again.
You're shattered like you've never been before. The life you knew in 1,000 pieces on the floor. Words fall short, times like these. This world drives you to your knees. You think you're never gonna get back to the you used to be. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Step into the light of grace. Yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Say goodbye to where you've been and tell your heart to beat again. Beginning, just let that word wash over you. It's all right now. Love's healing hands will pull you through. Get back up, take step one. Out of the darkness, feel the sun. 'Cause your story's far from over and your journey's just begun. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Step into the light of grace. Yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Say goodbye to where you've been and tell your heart to beat again. Let every heart break and every scar be a picture that reminds you who has brought you this far. 'Cause love sees farther than you ever could. But in this moment, heaven's working everything out for your good. Tell your heart to beat again. Close your eyes and breathe it in. Let the shadows fall away. Step into the light of grace. Yesterday's a closing door. You don't live there anymore. Say goodbye to where you've been and tell your heart to beat again. Your heart to beat again. To beat again. Tell your heart to beat again. To beat again.
Today is the day for some of you to love again. Today's the day for some of you to hope again. Today's the day for some of you, for the first time in a long time, to dream again. Today's the day for some of you to trust again. It's time for you to embrace the blessing of a new season. I can't see it yet, Pastor Todd. That's right. But there's one coming whether you know it or not. I can't see it yet, but it's still time to embrace it because it's around the corner. This morning, I just want us to bow our heads together as we close. I want to give you an opportunity to respond to what you've heard today by just saying, you know what? I'm just going to take a step of faith this morning. That God's taking me out of a difficult season and into a good season. And here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray. Just the piano is going to play for now. And after I've prayed, I'm going to invite you just to get up from where you are. And if you'd say, you know what? There's something that's been going on in my life, and it's not been easy, but I'm just trusting God not only to take me through, but that there's something good out the other side. Not only that God's going to carry me now, but we're going to dance just out the other side of this. And if perhaps today this has been for you, I'm just going to ask you to get up and to come here in a moment. And no one's going to come ask you what's been going on. No one's going to ask you how the problem started or what part you had in it or any of that stuff. I'm just going to close in prayer. Now, you can do this business right where you're sitting with God, but there's something about embracing the new season, and I'm going to ask you to get up and to come and just stand here across the front and say, you know what, I'm trusting God for it, even if I can't see it yet. Maybe you see just a little sliver of light. Maybe there's something just, you know what, there's a little hope right there. And I want you just to embrace that today. God, in this place this morning, you said that faith was letting our hearts see something that our eyes can't see. And so this morning in this place, God, we're just going to trust you for what's next. Take us out into all that you have in store. Create rivers in the wasteland. We're asking you for it in the name of Jesus. If God's been speaking to your heart today.